We thank you for the gift of salvation. We thank you for all of these folks gathered here today. And Lord, we just ask that you grant us wisdom and discernment as we go about looking at issues that face our fellow citizens, Lord. And we just ask that you continue to bless the state of Georgia and this great nation, Lord. And we thank you for all your many blessings. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Senator Goodman. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm going to allow the panel to come down and, if you hit your mic button, offer introductions so everybody kind of knows who we have on our panel. Just kind of, if you're a senator, you know what to do. But if you're our non-elected members, just tell us what city you're from and what your role is within government. And we'll start to my right.
State Senator Sam Watson, District 11 down in Southwest Georgia.
State Senator Russ Goodman, 8th District down in South Georgia. We got Lowndes, Eccles, Lanier, Atkinson, Clinch, Ware, and Pierce. So 7 counties anyway. So glad to be here.
I'm State Senator Clint Dixon. I represent the 45th Senate District. I've got the northern third of Gwinnett, about 50% of Barrow County. Grateful to be here with y'all.
Clay Davis. I'm a county commissioner for Spalding County, and for the last 3 years I've been their chairman.
Yes.
Jay Melder, City Manager, City of Savannah, Georgia. Grateful to be here, Chairman.
We've got Legislative Counsel to my left, Stuart Morelli, who does an awesome, amazing job. I consider him my government expert every time I need to do something and draft a bill. He's there. We've got a few presenters here that we're going to have to come and present, and thankful for the Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, for creating this study committee and seeing the need to look at cleaning up the code section as it relates to loss and some of the other sales taxes that we have within the state to bring a little uniformity. So I want to give regards on behalf of the Lieutenant Governor and his office, who've been extremely supportive of this process along the way. So make sure y'all tweet that and tell the Lieutenant Governor I said that, all right? Without that, we'll ask our first presenter to come. We'll also allow members of the committee, as they go through and make presentations, if you've got questions, just hit the button for your microphone, and we'll acknowledge you. And at the first, I would like to ask the Department of Revenue to come and get us kicked off and started. We've got Jonathan Ursery, Director of Local Government Services, and if y'all would introduce yourselves to the committee, we'll go from there.
Thank you, Chairman Mallow and members of the committee. My name is Austin Gibbons. I serve as DOR's Director of External Affairs and Communications. Today, we will do introductions, talk about the sales tax structure in Georgia, the timeline and administration of local option sales taxes, including the negotiation period, and then provide some brief background on other local sales taxes that the state has to offer. So today I am joined by Jonathan Ussery, who will be leading our presentation. He is our Director of Local Government Services and has been with the department for 32 years now. And then behind me, I have Deputy Commissioner Chester Cook, Assistant Deputy Commissioner Francis Watson, and Joe Snowden, our Legislative and Legal Affairs Specialist.
Get that so I can see it. These eyes are getting old. Good afternoon, everyone. I understand that most of what we want to talk about today is the lost tax, the joint county and municipal tax, sales tax. I've got a few other slides that we can skip at the end. Mr. Chairman, you can just let me know if you want to skip straight to questions. We can do that. By the numbers, the state, of course, has a 4% state sales tax that's imposed. There's a cap for local sales taxes of 2%, and that started way back when LOST, SPLOST, and eventually eSPLOST came on. Those legacy kind of sales taxes, I consider them. There was a exemption written into eSPLOST allowing the counties to exceed the cap on that, and then most of the new sales taxes, such as T-SPLOST, HOST, a lot of those have been not HOST, but MARTA have been allowed to exceed that cap with the exemptions written in, so that kind of created a little uniformity for those newer taxes. We have 586 local sales taxes that we administer in the state, and 154 of those are local option sales taxes. Of those 154, there are approximately 7 that are lost for educational purposes, and they were imposed by a local legislation, and they're quite old. For the types of sales taxes, I mentioned some of those, SPLOST, eSPLOST. We've got our new Consolidated Government Coliseum sales tax, Special District Transportation Sales and Use Tax, TSPLOST, which can be either a regional tax or a single county tax. I kind of lump in the transit taxes that are new there too. None of those are being imposed presently, and then we have the MARTA tax that we administer. For the joint county and municipal sales and use tax, these are imposed until they're voted out, or if there's a failure to meet that 10-year mandatory renegotiation period that occurs right after the decennial census. There are the renegotiation occurs with qualified municipalities. GMA will speak a little bit later on what it means to be a qualified municipality, what the requirements are, and they'll have some more details on these too. Mostly these sales taxes are used to fund county and municipal services, and the rate is imposed at 1%. There is a second penny local option sales tax that can be imposed for consolidated governments. Right now, we only have Columbus, Muskogee, and Macon Bibb that impose those based on 2 different code sections.
A question
Yes, sir.
as it relates to the loss, when it talks about imposed until voted out of or failure to meet requirements of distribution renegotiation following each decennial census. Didn't the Georgia Supreme Court come back and say that you could not litigate this if you couldn't reach the agreement? You couldn't go file in Superior Court to litigate it if the 2 governing bodies couldn't agree. Can anybody speak to that? You will? Thank you. All right, my man, you got me. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, and what I created here is just, there's a lot of words on this slide, and I thought you all might want to look at it later. It's not very good for a presentation because it doesn't hit those high points, but this is a timeline I created. This is my 3rd loss renegotiation round that I've done since I've been with the department. I was a newbie on the first one. The second one I got really involved. In this one I've got really involved in between trying to think about, should I retire or not before this happens. But in each 10-year period, when they have the census, of course, the U.S. Census Bureau will release the data, hopefully in the spring of the next year after the census occurs. We had a little delay due to the pandemic this past time, but still in plenty of time for the counties to commence the renegotiations, which occur on the second year, at least by the second year. After the census occurs by July 1st. Now, if the county fails to call that or something happens and they don't call it, any qualified or municipality can call for the renegotiations to occur. So there's something built in just in case something happens. I'll slide in here if they don't reach an agreement within 60 days of beginning those negotiations, then they are to submit the dispute to non-binding arbitration, mediation, or some other means of settling the dispute. And hopefully they do that. Now, up to now, the past 3 periods we've had, I've not seen one that has failed to renegotiate at some point in time. We've had some that had a little harder time than others. The renegotiated certificate of distribution has to come to the Department of Revenue or to the Commissioner of Revenue by December 30th of the second year following the census. That is when we will implement that new distribution percentage. The time period actually for implementing that is either January 1st following the date of execution or the first day of the second calendar month, which follows the date of the execution of that distribution certificate. can create a little time crunch there if we don't get it until December 20th. Trying to implement it by January 1st. But if it's only a few, we can do that. If it's 50 of them, then we have a hard time. If the certificate's not received by the commissioner, the authority to impose the tax ceases on December 31st. If that happens, and it's never happened to my knowledge, at least not during my tenure, and I don't know that it's happened before, as far back as I have records, then that money that's collected, you kind of get caught in the middle of a time period there where you're collecting tax for December, but the tax ceases on December 31st. Well, we've got this money that's kind of caught in the queue, waiting to be distributed. And if we don't receive that new distribution certificate, the commissioner will hold on to that money, and then if we don't receive, and then he's supposed to receive a distribution certificate regardless, a new distribution certificate of what to do with those funds that are kind of in flux or in transit to the local governments. If we don't receive one if he doesn't receive one by April 30th, then the state holds on to the money, and it remains property of the state. Again, that's never happened, luckily. Again, December 31st, prior certificate of distribution expires. If we haven't received a new one, then the tax ceases. I talked about the January 1st date, or the first day of the second calendar month, as the implementation date of the new certificate of distributions. Let's jump. I talked about that part. And we talked about what happens with those. So that the distribution certificate can be renegotiated at any time between the 10-year period. The mandatory period is right after the census. So if someone wants to implement something partway through that 10-year period, the counties and the cities are free to negotiate at any time. And then the subsequent follow-up certificate during that period is implemented on the next January 1st after it's executed. It doesn't have the second calendar month stipulation in there for that. And of course, we talked about the residual proceeds, that they will remain property of the state if we don't receive a certificate. Just a little bit of a process at the state level. We'll receive a distribution certificate from the counties, signed by the county, the cities, and we'll verify that all the jurisdictions that are currently receiving a distribution are on that certificate. We don't want to miss anyone. And if we want to see also on that certificate that there is a signature for each of those. If someone comes up, there's not a signature on there, then we are calling the county to find out, are you considering that municipality an absent municipality, meaning that they are a very small municipality. They have less than 50% of the total of all the other municipalities combined in the county. And in that case, the county and the larger municipalities can consider a small city absent and just give them a percentage. Now, there in the law, it stipulates what you do, how much of a percentage you give that city, and it's based on population. So we will also verify if there is an absent municipality on there. We will verify the percentage of that to make sure that it's accurate. We'll go ahead and log those. We prepare them for entry into the DR's accounting system, make sure that we can get it implemented in time and that it applies to any sales tax returns that are filed. And then we go to our information technology folks, request the update. We make changes in our test system. We test it for accuracy. It takes us approximately 6 weeks to implement all that. Now, we can rush it through, like I said, if we have some that come in at the last minute. And then we perform a final update, and then the processing system, our production processing system, is updated after that point with the new distribution percentages. We also have phased distributions. We kind of call this slide. I mentioned the counties and cities can renegotiate at any time during that 10-year period in between the census. We have some counties, and we've got the city manager Spalding County here. Spalding's one of our counties that has submitted multiple distribution certificates at the time that they renegotiate. So we've got about 14 counties that will submit. They'll either submit one for every 2 years, some submit one for every year. And so we'll have a stack of distribution certificates. Well, this one takes effect 2023, this one in 2024, next one in 2025. And so we've got those lined up to implement as the years come around. Totally fine to do that. I think it was Commissioner Jackson back in the 80s that had us put in place a distribution certificate that had multiple places on there to have multiple changes. Some challenges possibly with lost, and this first bullet is kind of a challenge generally among all the sales tax types. Some businesses have a problem identifying where they are delivering goods, which county it's in. For my situation, I live in with a Stone Mountain address, but I live in Gwinnett County unincorporated, and my zip code overlaps both Gwinnett and DeKalb counties. And so sometimes, most of the time, at least the bigger companies will charge me the Gwinnett County tax. Sometimes the smaller companies don't know where I'm at. They just say, oh, Stone Mountain 30087, you're in DeKalb County, and charge me the DeKalb County tax. It happens with a lot of the smaller businesses. But the larger businesses, like Amazon, they know how to do that. They know how to use the ZIP +5 code to get a more accurate location. But that is a challenge for the businesses. And of course, the counties would like to receive all of the tax that's due to them, so they want it to be accurate as well. We have the possible challenge I mentioned earlier of meeting that first day of the second calendar month following the month of the certificate's execution. That's a challenge that DOR has at times, but we can work through that. That's part of the law, and we'll work through it the way we're supposed to. But if it were to mimic the imposition of a new sales tax, which is the first day of the first quarter, more than 80 days after the election takes place, for example, such as a SPLOST, that would give us a little more time for implementing it and testing it and making sure everything's good. The last four slides are other local option sales taxes. Commissioner, if you'd like, or Chairman, if you'd like me to go over that, I can go through those, or we can go straight to questions if there are any.
Well, I think we can pause for questions here, and I would like for us to look at some of the other taxes that are out there, because many of us represent many different parts of the state, and I want to try to get some consensus. And I do want to acknowledge James Beal from the Pro Tem's office, who's here with us today. Good to see you, my friend. So yeah, absolutely. And I yield for any of the members that have questions at this time. All right, the Senate is a high-performing body. Let me be clear.
Well, I either did a good job or a poor job. So,
well, I would like to say, coming from across the hall, and a couple of us here have come from across the hall, I think this is definitely a higher body, so less questions from the Senate. So, if you want to move through those additional taxes and share with us about those, that'd be great.
Certainly, the homestead option sales tax is kind of we've got Article 2, which is the loss tax, but the homestead option sales tax is Article 2A in 48.8. And there are essentially three parts kind of to this. The part one was the original host that was implemented, and Rockdale County and DeKalb County were the original counties that had the original part one host. Of course, it cannot be imposed in a special district with a lost, and so that's why you will see those two counties, they do not have a lost. Part two is the equalized homestead option sales tax, and this was created specifically for the DeKalb County situation. with new municipalities coming in and how to distribute that money between the county and the cities. Again, this is the same, cannot be imposed with a host. This particular part 2, it has to be imposed with a SPLOST. DeKalb County did not have a SPLOST at the time, and so when they voted to change from the original host to the e-host, they also had to put up for vote a question on imposing a SPLOST. If the SPLOST were to fail, the e-host fails, and they revert back to the original host. Part 3 is not being implemented currently in any counties. It's a revised homestead option sales and use tax. And I think that would take more of the place of the Part 2 were it to be voted out. That would have to, this is kind of same as lost, it would have to be voted out. We have our county sales and use taxes in Article 3, and that's where we've got the county SPLOST, the sales tax for educational purposes, or the e-SPLOST, and the consolidated government Coliseum project sales tax, all lumped to get together in that section. Most of us are familiar with SPLOST and e-SPLOST. Of course, the e-SPLOST goes to the school boards. In most cases, there's only one school board in most counties, and in a small number of counties, they have to split that with a local school board or a city school board, and they have a certificate of distribution for that as well. It's kind of similar to the lost, but they use generally the FTE count of the student count for determining how that distribution split occurs. And if they do not use that, then they use a local legislative formula. Our transportation special local option sales tax, or T-SPLOST, is in Article 5, 5A, 5B. We have regional T-SPLOST, which began first in 2012. There can only be one tax per region, and it cannot be imposed in a county with a it can be imposed, in a county with a T-SPLOST 2. The single county T-SPLOST, or T-SPLOST 2, is what we name it in DOR. The counties can impose this if they are not in a T-SPLOST 1 district. And they currently impose a SPLOST, MARTA, or a LOST. The situation with T-SPLOST 2 allows a T-SPLOST 2 to be voted in by a county, but a region can come right behind that and impose the T-SPLOST 1 for the region, and the county gets caught up in that. So you may have a county that has actually 2 T-SPLOSTs, one for the region and one that's specifically for the county. And then, of course, the MARTA. The MARTA is not in Title 48. It's actually part of the Constitution. The DeKalb, Fulton, and Clayton County are counties with the MARTA tax. Atlanta also imposes a tax separate from the county tax. So if you live in the city of Atlanta, you pay the city of Atlanta MARTA tax and the Fulton County MARTA tax, or DeKalb County if you're in the small part of Atlanta in DeKalb.
Just a question from Mr. Melder.
Thank you. Of the taxes you described here, which require participation with municipalities from the county and which do not?
I believe in most cases they require some type of participation. It's not the same as the local option sales tax. Mm-hmm. In the case of the SPLOST, we will generally get an intergovernmental agreement with the county identifying special projects, or DOR doesn't always know what the split is, because on the SPLOST we send 100% of the money to the county based on the code section. But the cities do receive a portion of that. In eSPLOST, it's of course the county school board and a local school board that split it.
What about for the host?
Host, it is required that they split it. There were some court cases in the 90s, I believe, which is why the e-host was created. The cities in DeKalb County wanted a certain portion of the host that they believed they deserved to receive, And there was some negotiating, I think, with the county, and eventually went to court.
So you're certain the homestead option sales tax requires participation with municipalities?
GMA might be able to to address that a little better, because I'm not sure what the case is with Rockdale County.
Is there any tax in these categories that you know of that is a municipal tax that doesn't require participation with the county?
There is the most tax, or the water and sewer project tax. That is a city-only tax. Currently, it's the city of Atlanta, the cities of College Park, East Point, and Hapeville that have that tax. And the way the legislation is currently written, I believe only those cities can currently participate with or impose that type of tax. And so they do receive 100% of those funds without any regard to the rest of the county or any other city or municipality.
Are all counties eligible to receive a host?
If
By the way the law is written?
they would have to cease the lost first before they could impose the host.
Right.
But I think in most cases they could.
But the
have
state
a
law
host.
doesn't prohibit any counties like a most prohibits most municipalities from participating in that.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
And GMA, like I said, can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Mike number 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The most taxes, I did not see that in the slide sheet here, and I've heard mention of that. How many municipalities have that? And I guess could you maybe mention that or talk about that?
Sure, most is, there are 4 municipalities, Atlanta, College Park, East Point, and Hapeville, that have a most tax. And they impose that completely separate from the rest of the county. That's their own city tax. Creates a unique situation, since all taxes are reported based on county in Georgia, and that's how our system was set up. And so we kind of create a pseudo county unto themselves for those cities, so that the reporting can be accurate from the businesses within that jurisdiction.
I think we would like some information on the most, if you all could share that back with us as we look through the gamut of taxes that we have available. And just one thing I'm looking at is just consistency with the taxes and how they're levied. And I think when we had the county unit system, and then when that changed, and some of the legislation that exists, we may need to look at making it easier for the department to administer these taxes moving forward. There's a question, I think, from Senator Watson.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, what can those most funds be used for specifically?
They are specifically for water and sewer projects.
Just water and sewer.
And I think there's a population cap or a
There's
water
population
cap or something.
Gallons, yeah, that they use. I think GMA and I both pulled those slides out of our presentations from the House presentation, thinking that we were going to concentrate more on lost. So.
Well, I think with loss, East Loss, it's all loss somewhere along the line. Just to look at it so we can understand the brevity of the section as a whole. Are there any questions from? I saw Mike number 8. Who's number 8? Oh, 7. Mr. Melder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just to put as we get through more information on the study committee, to put a point on it, I think when we see negotiations across lost, counties have the, for lack of a better word, threat to participate in a host should the lost fail, where municipalities don't have that same tool allowed for by the state. So it creates an imbalance and an unequal playing field when negotiating a lost tax. More of a statement than a question, Chairman. Sorry. Thank you.
Receive. Any other members have any? My good friend, Senator Russ Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. What is the timeline, do you think it averages from the time the money is spent before the money is returned to munisipalities? Is it, as far as the collection of the tax, it coming the revenue and coming back to the local communities where it was spent, what's the time frame for that?
I'll just use an example. The let's say the January sales that occur, have to be reported to the department by February 20th. Within 10 days of us of the DOR receiving those funds, we send it back to the counties and the cities. So 20th is when the returns are due to us, and then our closeout period, when we're closing out the month, is 4 business days before the end of the month. And that's when we close out our books for that month, send the money back to the counties and the cities so that it can settle in their account before the end of the month. It may take a day or two longer way out in South Georgia and some of the more rural banks to get the money than it would some of the larger banks, but they usually get it in their account before the end of the month.
Pretty fast. Well, congratulations to the Department of Revenue. Y'all get the municipal and county governments their money back quick. So that's a testament to the work that you all do. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay. With that, thank you all for the wonderful presentation, and to the department, to our assistant commissioners for being here with us today. Thank you all as well. We'll move through the agenda to, I believe it's GMA. Rusi Patel and Claire Chan to come and share with us from GMA, and then they'll provide some testimony. And then after that, just so the colleagues on the committee will be aware, we'll get consensus on the next date. The chairman of Spalding County has agreed to host us for our next Law Study Committee hearing, and the city manager from the city of Savannah has agreed to host us in Savannah. So we'll take this show on the road and then wrap up back in Atlanta. Sound good? Wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rushi Patel, I'm the General Counsel with the Georgia Municipal Association. With me is Claire Chan. She's the Senior Research Analyst for GMA. Joining us today, we have 3 city officials who will be speaking after us. So we have Mayor Julie Smith from the city of Tifton. She's our immediate past president. We have City Manager Tim Young from the city of Hapeville, and we have City Manager Marsha Hampton from Douglasville. We also have Joe Shearhouse from Savannah in the audience, along with our CEO and Executive Director, Larry Hansen, and our Governmental Relations Associate, Leona Rittenhouse, back here joining us from our team today. Thank you for having us today. What I thought we'd do to begin is to go through a little bit of the history of Lost, and a little further than what Jonathan and DOR we're doing, and then I'm not a numbers guy, so Claire's up here to tell me all the numbers and tell y'all all the numbers. So she's going to provide some data insights as we go through the presentation. When we're looking at Lost as an overall concept, what we tend to hear from our members, and I think the county association would say that they hear this a lot from their members as well, is what we would like to see in terms of things that could help local governments fix Lost in negotiations in the future is changes that could help reduce tension and animosity, so there's less fighting, increasing transparency, so that can help on the negotiation front, but can also help in the future, because this is a cycle that happens every 10 years, and you may not have the same city and county officials 10 years later. So increasing transparency can help know what happened in the past. And most importantly, I think, is providing a safety net for the critical resources that help the citizens and in cities and counties. And we're going to talk a little bit about the data there as to why this is a very important tax for local governments in providing services throughout the state of Georgia. So first, the basics here is, as DOR mentioned, this is a 1 cent sales tax that is imposed countywide. The first loss was actually imposed in 1975. I feel like this keeps going out. Was imposed in 1975, but that tax was a county tax and it ended up getting ruled as unconstitutional. And so what happened was it was a county tax that the counties shared with cities, and it was ruled unconstitutional. And so the legislature came back a few years later and passed a special district tax, which is what we have now. And it's been amended over the decades, but It was a special district tax, so we have 159 special districts that the borders of those 159 special districts match the county borders. In this special district tax, we have revenue split between counties and quote unquote qualified municipalities. And I'll talk about what are qualified municipalities here in a minute. The distribution agreed to in the certificate is something that is negotiated between the county and the city or cities in that county that are qualified municipalities. There is no formula. So this is something that causes a lot of negotiation because there's unique situations in every local government throughout the state. And you're going to hear a little bit about that from the three local officials that are here today. It's based on 8 criteria in the law. The 8 criteria, I think both cities and counties will agree that the 8 criteria are weird, is a nice way of putting it. And I'll talk through those 8 criteria in a short bit. And 147 of the 159 counties or special districts levy a loss and then must file a certificate with DOR. So 147, there's a few more that have the e-loss that DOR mentioned, or not the e-loss, that have the loss that's dedicated to education that was mentioned earlier. But 147 have to file this certificate with DOR. And the revenue, very importantly, is used for funding local government services in a property tax rollback. And I really want to focus on this funding local government services part. Because when you look at this, 154 counties have a loss, but you see that there's a few that don't have a loss: Cherokee, Cobb, DeKalb, Gwinnett, and Rockdale. And we heard DeKalb and Rockdale have a host. It's a homestead option sales tax, which is a different tax. Bullock, Chattooga, Colquitt, Habersham, Houston, Mitchell, and Rabun County, the money goes straight to education. So there's no negotiation there. Now, what's important here is these special districts have these special district taxes split between the county and qualified municipalities. Qualified municipalities is a limited term when it comes to local option sales tax. It is not every active municipality in the state. And there's a difference. As active municipalities can provide a number of services. I think it's 14 services to become an active municipality. But for some reason or another, in local option sales tax, to become a qualified municipality, it's a limited list. And the limited list is water, sewer, garbage, police, fire. And the one that can cause consternation with some counties is library, because there's no definition of really what is a library, right? And so you have different sizes of libraries. But the challenge here is that you don't have every city available to collect this local option sales tax. But those cities that do collect the local option sales tax or do receive money for the local option sales tax, Claire ran some numbers, and what it comes down to is a little over a quarter of the budgets, the average budget of those cities, is utilized to fund services in those cities, or is part of their budget. So a quarter of.
I noticed on the at least 3 services: water, police, fire, library, sewer, garbage. Is there no reference who's responsible for the stormwater?
So stormwater is not one of the services to become a qualified municipality. Stormwater is a service in the supplementary powers that cities and counties have available to them. Well, cities do. Cities provide stormwater through statute. But it's not one of the qualified municipality definition services.
And a previous question, if you could just explain, for the counties that the loss proceeds go to the Board of Education by local constitutional amendment. For example, I see for Bullock, for example, that all goes to the Board of Education. What happens if a city decides, like the city of Statesboro says, well, we want a percentage of the loss now? We're growing as a city, and it's all been going to the school board. What would be the venue or vehicle for that? How would that work?
I think they would have to come to the legislature to get a change to that constitutional amendment. I don't think it would be an easy process, because those counties that the loss goes directly to the Board of Education has been through a process that's come through the legislature for those counties. So.
One of those counties that I know of, Chattooga, where they split it with municipalities.
Thank you.
Claire, did you want to talk a little bit about the that you looked at earlier today?
Yeah, that was just a point to say that around a quarter of city budgets come from lost, and that can range anywhere from a very, very small fraction all the way to, I think, 70% of a city's budget. And for the most part, those are our smallest communities in the state.
Thank you. So what you see there is, without the local option sales tax, a large number of cities, and I would imagine the same is true for counties, would have a big hole in their budgets for providing the services that citizens that you represent rely upon, like police, fire, water, garbage. And so you're left with a challenge if the lost goes away. If the lost goes away, how do you fill the budget to pay for those services that the citizens come to expect? How do you pay for the police? How do you pay for the fire? And in most local governments, if you have law enforcement, that is the most heavy item in your budget. That's the most expensive item in your budget. And so how do you pay for the police if the loss goes away? And this is a real challenge because, as DOR mentioned, there's two ways for the local option sales tax to go away. One would be by a vote of the citizens. And if the citizens vote to go get rid of the local option sales tax, I don't think that there's any argument anyone can make that you should continue to have the local option sales tax. But the other option is if you fail to come to an agreement at the end of the time period. And if the local option sales tax goes away at the end of that time period, it goes away and it harms all the local governments in the provision of services, because all of a sudden you have a budget hole to fill. Now what was mentioned earlier was that the counties do have an option for trying to impose a homestead option sales tax. Cities do not have something that they could fall back on to try to impose. So there are 4 cities that have a municipal option sales tax, but as mentioned earlier, it is very limited to Atlanta, College Park, East Point, and Hapeville. And it's limited because the way it's defined in the statute is you have to provide a water service that meets a certain gallon requirement. And I think it's like 80 something million gallons a day or something like that. So it's a very high threshold, and only the city of Atlanta water system meets that right now. But going back to the slides, so the qualified municipality definition is very limited. But how do we get to who must sign the certificate? Well, obviously the county has to sign their certificate because the county is the same geographic boundary as a special district. They're the body that has to sign on the county end. Not all cities have to sign. Okay, so first you have a limiting factor where you're having qualified municipalities. Now, qualified municipalities, as we just learned, are a lessened definition of active municipalities. So you could be an active municipality doing all the things that normal cities can do, but you don't provide the same 3 services as a qualified municipality, so you may not be a qualified municipality. And then, as was mentioned by DOR earlier, with the cities, a combined population representing half of the total population of the qualified municipalities population has to sign the law certificate. So it's not every city, but it's half the population of the qualified municipalities. Now, this is where it gets really weird. This is the 8 criteria that must be considered when renegotiating a lost. The 8 criteria, it is really important to know that the 8 criteria came about before the Service Delivery Strategy Act. So these 8 criteria came about a few years before the Service Delivery Strategy Act, which means it was written not thinking that there was a law that was going to deal with how cities and counties negotiate how to provide services. The Service Delivery Strategy Act was passed in 1997. This came about, I think, in 93 or 94 as an amendment to local option sales tax. And as a result, you'll notice something with this list of 8 criteria is that it's somewhat repetitive in some places, right? So if you look at the first one, it says, this is a truncated version of what's actually in the statute. What's actually in the statute is kind of funny. It says service delivery responsibilities of each local government to the population served by the local government. And then it talks about things like conventions and trade shows and things like that in the first criteria. So it's talking about service delivery responsibilities geared towards things that might happen in the daytime, like events, right? The second one talks about service delivery responsibilities for each local government to the resident population. Generally, that's understood to be like your census nighttime population, right? The third one talks about existing service delivery responsibilities of each local government. You see where this is starting to get a little confusing. You can imagine as local governments how this gets confusing as well, because you have the first three talking about service delivery in different ways, and how are you supposed to identify that? The fourth one is the effect of the change in distribution on the ability of each local government to meet short and long-term debt. So one of the goals here is to not harm cities and counties in this negotiation process where they can't pay their bills, right? The fifth one is point of sale and use that generates the tax. And DOR will tell you that we're not a point of sale state, we're a point of distribution state. But cities will make the argument that the large number of businesses that generate the tax in a lot of communities are located in the city. Now, counties will say, well, they're also located in the county. You'll see this, how this becomes a fight. Intergovernmental agreements between local governments. Now, here's where this is also an interesting point, that this comes before Service Delivery Strategy Act. Because the Service Delivery Strategy Act, a lot of the negotiation as to how services are provided are negotiated between the SDS. But this, again, came before the SDS Act. So intergovernmental agreements between local governments, there can still be intergovernmental agreements outside of the Service Delivery Strategy Act. But the 8 criteria want cities and counties to contemplate what other agreements do you have with your other local governments in your jurisdiction. Number 7 is the use by any local government of property taxes and other revenues from some taxpayers to subsidize the costs of services provided to other taxpayers. When you look at the Service Delivery Strategy Act, there's a definite tilt and intent that people do not get double taxed. And that's kind of the same goal here in this 7th criteria, is people don't get double taxed. And what does that mean? Is it means that citizens should not pay for one service in their community and then have to pay for that same service in a different community that they don't utilize, right? And then the last one is any coordinated plan of county and city service delivery and financing. Now you see, again, we're talking about service delivery, and it's mixing all this stuff together, and you can see how this gets confusing and can lead to conflict between cities and counties.
Absolutely, and I think just further question to you, Mr. Patel. We went through a loss negotiation in the city of Savannah, and most of my constituents always blame everything on the city. They forget that we are also in the county, because they see the city more than they do the county, because most of their services are going to be city services. But also at the same time, I hear from those same constituents that talk about tourism and how that is impacting their way of living. And so for our city, for example, and I'm sure the manager would attest to this, we have a large influx of tourists that place burden on the infrastructure, but then taxpayers are having to pay for some of those infrastructure services. And I guess my question would be, looking at this criteria of the 8 things, I don't see anything that talk about those who are maybe visitors to a local government or city government that may add that burden onto those taxpayers that live there. Is there any consideration in that? Is it talked about? I don't know. I'm just asking. Maybe y'all know.
So no, there's not any consideration for those people that are outside of the special district completely that come into that special district, tourists mostly, business visitors, things like that. I think it would be really challenging to try to capture that and how that's split in the local option sales tax. Now, a lot of those visitors and tourists spend the night, and they would get a hotel room, so they might be paying through a hotel motel tax, and I know particularly in Savannah they would be. there's other ways to capture those visitors, but it's not contemplated in the local option sales tax, other than the fact that they may buy goods and services while they're in the city or while they're in that county and pay sales tax while they're there.
Mr. Melder.
Mr. Chairman, I think I will attest to that, and to add on to that point, I think in our negotiations in Savannah and Chatham County, we were really hoping to get better data on criteria 5, point of sale, and knowing that it isn't a point of sale state, it's a point of delivery, but it gets to your point, Mr. Chairman, where if we have commercial districts that are in municipalities and served by municipalities, and the infrastructure there is paid for by municipalities, and that's where the sales tax is being generated the most, we need, that criteria needs to be able to be well defined, that we can have data that's supported to show where those that sales tax criteria, that sales tax is actually being generated, whether point of sale or point of distribution, because the ability to support those commerce centers and where those pennies are being accrued, I think, is a really important part of a loss negotiation, and because of these criteria, is very, very hard to make clear through data.
Well, the good news is I don't think any of us were around when that passed in '97. So fresh eyes always good. Any other members have questions? I'll let you go through and finish up, Mr. Patel, if there are no other questions.
All right.
One question from Senator Watson. Sure. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before I forget, so you mentioned that a quarter of the city municipal budgets come from lost. So what happens in the 7 that it goes to education? How do they operate and function if they don't get the lost?
So I can't speak to the exact specifics of the cities in those 7, but I would imagine that they may have lessened services, they may have higher property taxes. It may vary from place to place. But the point I was trying to make is that the majority of cities, and I would imagine the majority of counties, heavily rely on this sales tax to not increase their property taxes so they can pay for services. Because the citizens in those communities have come to rely on their police and their fire and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And without this paying for a quarter of the budget, or sometimes up to 70% of their budget, those local governments would have to find another way to pay for the police and fire. And sometimes that may not be readily available.
But I assume in those 7 that their school taxes are extremely low.
I would imagine, yeah.
So it kind of offset. You're either going to have high property taxes for, one or the other, either way you look at it. Right.
Well, it might be true, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
So I think we talked a little bit about some of these. DOR talked a little bit about the renegotiation triggers, but some of the facts here is loss can be renegotiated. It is renegotiated every 10 years upon the census currently. It can also be renegotiated upon changes in service delivery. If a city population increases 15% by annexation, which, that changes the size of the city. If there's a new city created, we've had a lot of that happen in Metro Atlanta, but remember, most of the Metro Atlanta counties, that the core Metro Atlanta counties like Gwinnett, DeKalb, Cobb, do not have a loss, but Fulton does. And Fulton has had a number of new cities in the last 18 years. And we already mentioned the census. And the last one here is if a city no longer is a qualified municipality, because remember that definition of qualified municipality is limited. And so if a city is no longer a qualified municipality, they are no longer eligible to get the loss tax. The timeline begins no later than July 1st, so that second year after the census. And there's a 60-day period allowed for renegotiation. If the negotiations are unsuccessful, then the parties have to pursue mediation in some form of alternative dispute resolution. It is not binding. So they go to this, and then everyone can say, we're not going to agree with that. So there's no binding nature to that. The negotiations have to be complete and signed and sent to DOR by December 30th of that year. And so if if the cities and counties don't get to that agreement by December 30th, by the end of the day, December 30th, then the lost is just going to expire and the tax is not going to be collected in that jurisdiction after the time period that DOR mentioned where there's a little bit of a lag because it's impossible to turn things off just like that. So that creates a big problem, right, is if the tax goes away.
What's the, Mr. Patel, what happens if the tax goes away? Can they reach an agreement by January 30th, or is it just gone forever, or what does that look like?
So they can't reach an agreement by January 30th under the current law. It's gone forever in that form. What they would have to do is they would have to go back to the voters and get another referendum and get that passed and then reimpose the tax, which will take a lot of time. And so the challenge you would have is that you would have a gap. And so you would have the tax at one level, and then you would have a dip in the tax rate, and then the vote to have the election to basically increase taxes back to where they were before. And that can make it very challenging. So in the meantime, you're looking at a year plus, maybe longer. It may be permanent because the voters may not agree to reimpose it. But you may be looking at a time period where the budgets of the cities and the county that have lost are having to figure out how they're going to pay for all those services in that time period. And it could be very challenging. You're probably looking at significant property tax increases in that time period.
Thank you. Question from Mike number 3, Senator Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I misunderstood this, please forgive me, but did I not understand you to say that as long as we've had these local option sales taxes, that you've never had it come to the point that they were not able to come to some kind of resolution? So is it, I'm just asking the question, is it not true that the set of circumstances that you're describing has not happened in the state of Georgia?
It has not happened so far, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how the negotiations end up in this baseball arbitration and the litigation you were talking about earlier in the next few slides. So let's talk about baseball arbitration, and it wasn't actually called baseball arbitration in the statute, but it's an easy way to understand it is back in 2010, the legislature passed an amendment to local option sales tax to create a safety net, to create a backstop. Backstop's a good way to call it because it's called baseball arbitration, you know. But basically what this did was if the cities and counties could not come to an agreement by a certain date, they would decide whether or not they wanted to go to this process where they would submit their best and final offer to a judge in court. And the judge would look at the information that was presented, one from the county, one from the cities, and basically call balls and strikes. That's why it was nicknamed baseball arbitration. They would look at the data and look at the information submitted and say, I like the county offer or I like the city offer. And that's how that got resolved. It was supposed to prevent the loss from expiring through a failure in negotiation. But what happened was litigation was brought the first time this came about in Turner County versus City of Ashburn, and the Georgia Supreme Court ruled this process unconstitutional. It was ruled unconstitutional because it was a blending of the judiciary doing legislative duties, basically. And the court said that's not allowed. And so what happened, though, before the Supreme Court declared the baseball arbitration process unconstitutional, is 35 counties and I can't remember how many it was. It was well over 100 cities were in the process of doing a baseball arbitration process. So that tells you something right there, is that a good portion of local governments in the state of Georgia were going through this process when it got ruled unconstitutional. And thankfully, the Georgia Supreme Court had a 10-day stay, and so those local governments were able to sign agreements in that 10-day period. If we looked at things today, as this last cycle, if that same time period applied, there would have been around the mid 50s numbers of counties and hundreds of cities available could have utilized that baseball arbitration process. So, to your point, no one has had the loss expire yet, but what has happened was the threat of losing the lost has been so significant because the threat of losing the lost can create such a hole in a budget that you will find that a lot of local governments, and I'm sure this is on city and county sides, have said that they have signed an agreement at the last possible moment because the threat of losing it was greater than getting the percentage they felt was appropriate for their county or for their city. And what has that led to is it's led to a lot of animosity between local officials at the local level. And if there's a way that we can prevent that animosity, because remember, cities and counties have to work together on more than just this. And, you know, we work with ACCG on a lot of things, and I would say 95% or more of things, the cities and counties at the legislature agree on everything. And that's probably true at the local level as well. But when it comes to you're putting a pot of money in front of local governments and telling them, figure it out, and if you don't figure it out, you're going to have to figure out some other way to pay for your police, that creates a lot of ill will. And so that's a problem that we see.
Yeah, thank you, Rushi. And again, Claire Chan with research analyst at GMA. I would prefer to keep my remarks super short today so that we can focus on the testimony from our city leaders that came along with us. But I think, so GMA did analyze the loss distribution rates from 2022 and 2012 provided by the DOR. And we hope that this analysis will offer the committee an objective, data-informed view of how cities and counties on the whole fared during these negotiations, and just to provide some context as these discussions amongst the committee move forward. So if I may actually jump to the last slide and then go back to the other slide. These charts are just to show you give you a snapshot of basically how these negotiations fared. You'll see a lot of yellow, which is to say that for a vast majority of cities and counties, lost virtually remained the same, and we kind of used an arbitrary 5. If it changed by 5 or more percentage points, that was quite significant, and that's what you see in the red and green. But if it was less than 5 percentage points or no change at all, the loss rate stayed the same. You'll see those in yellow. So just at first glance, you see a lot of yellow, but that really kind of highlights the point that you have to judge how each county and city fared on a case-by-case basis. And it also highlights just how much goes into these negotiations beyond population or population share. Compromises are necessary to ensure taxpayers in all jurisdictions of the special district are treated equitably. All parties to a lost agreement also must balance other existing intergovernmental agreements, as Rushi said, that may already be signed off on, such as SPLOST, mutual aid agreements, and other service delivery provisions. So while a small set of counties and cities saw quite drastic changes in their loss rates, and these do deserve individual attention and diagnosis of what drove those changes, just looking at the data from 2012 to 2022, they don't amount to any strong pattern on one side or the other, city or county, to say that cities on the whole lost out or counties on the whole lost out. Yet there was still obviously a lot of contention across the state, and seeing just at the going back to the previous slide, how the negotiations progressed throughout fall 2022 in terms of the percentage of counties that filed their loss certificates on, just select dates where we asked DOR to provide us with the current list. You see that even 3 months away from the deadline, only 50% of counties had reached an agreement, and even 2 weeks before the deadline, around mid-December, there were still 30 counties left. Only 80% had filed their agreements with DOR. So it's worth keeping in mind these two visuals when looking at how the progress of negotiations played out, how drawn out they were, even as parties already entered mediation or arbitration as required by August 29th, and as time was running out. And so I think all this just it does beg the question of whether the current timeline and the dispute resolution mechanism or lack thereof in the law are conducive to effective and efficient negotiations. That's really all I wanted to say today, but just to let the committee members know that I and GMA we remain at your disposal if you have any questions about the data and wanting to compare how cities and counties looked from 2012 to 2022, comparing it to population and various other metrics. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
And I wanted to conclude, just circling back to my original point, is that when you're looking at this process, is if we can find ways to reduce tension and animosity, and one big way to reduce tension and animosity is if the tax can't go away without some vote from the voters, to make it go away. If the cities and counties have some fail-safe backstop so the services can continue to be provided without an increase in property taxes, that can reduce tension and animosity. Increasing transparency, that can work in two different ways. Is increasing transparency is if there's documentation as to how a city or county came to their numbers, that can increase the transparency, but it can also help future commissioners and future mayors and future council members know what happened the last negotiation period. And then again, the most important thing is that safety net. That safety net is not for the city elected officials or the county elected officials. That safety net is for the citizens in those communities to be able to have the same services that they've come to expect without having their property tax increased or not having their services reduced greatly because the property taxes could be reduced, or not the sales tax revenue is reduced, so they can't provide the service. So you have to be able to find a way that services can continue to be provided. But be glad to take questions. I want to thank Claire for providing me with data. I'm not very good with data, so she helps me a lot with that. And we'd be glad to take any questions.
If there are questions, I'll just ask the members to ask their questions. My little computer is malfunctioning. So there we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I was going to ask was, so would you think it would be helpful if you had a situation, where these folks couldn't come to a resolution, right? Instead of it going away, that it goes on suspension until they can come to a resolution, and that way you don't have to start over the whole process?
So I mean, that's a potential option. I think it would be a question for DOR about how hard it is to suspend a tax. I think it's important to know that it's probably difficult to just suspend a tax, which I don't know if that means that it's still collected, and there's questions about how that would work, but I mean, that would certainly be better than it going away. So yes, I think anything that can keep the tax going while there's a negotiation, there's ideas of like a carrot and stick method is, instead of having binding arbitration, you have some benefit if you come to an agreement, you have a stick if you don't. So that would be in the stick method, I think.
Senator Halbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about the other chart. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. So I'm seeing that there was a significant increase in both cities, 70 cities, 15%, and also counties, 21 counties, 15%. But those two, I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly. Those two things are actually not overlapping, correct? Because the cities are negotiating, and you've got a percentage that saw an increase in the percentage that they'll get. tied to, but separate from the counties, which also, because everybody's kind of at the negotiation table with their own ideal outcome, right?
That's right. So when cities and counties go to this negotiation table, they all have their data and their facts, and they're trying to say, this is what we should get. And so they have in their mind what they believe is a fair number for their local government. And yeah, so you'll see there's no real rhyme or reason when you look at this map of who had an increase, who had a decrease. It's all over the state, right? You have some places in some areas that had an increase and other places that had a decrease, and they're right next to each other. So yes, that is correct, is that the numbers for increases and decreases, it's just really based on the needs and negotiations in that local community. So like, and a good example of this is if you look at Fulton County on this map,
Which is my county.
which is your county, you see it's a dark red. It has a significant decrease. And it says the county had a significant decrease, but the county's percentage in Fulton County is actually higher now than it was at the end of the last cycle. But why did they have a significant decrease? Well, because new cities were created in that 10-year period in Fulton County. So there's a lot of factors that go into each local negotiation place. I don't know if do you have anything to add? Okay.
Thank you. I have another question. I'm going to hold because it might be better for our municipal representatives. But ultimately, what we've heard, I think, is that everybody's coming to the table trying to find money in order to provide the services that they need without raising taxes. Is that a fair assessment of the negotiation?
That's a fair assessment. That's a fair assessment.
Mr. Melder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Local option sales tax negotiation is a zero-sum game,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And I think I find it interesting, even though no time in the history of Georgia has a lost expired because counties and municipalities haven't been able to reach an agreement by the deadline. And per the data, there's no rhyme or reason to how a municipality may fare versus a county fare in this process. But still, we experience a tremendous amount of trauma over these negotiations. And I just wanted to know from GMA's perspective, does the deadline or does the striking down of baseball arbitration or other type of safety net advantage one side or another in negotiations?
That's a good question. And I think you probably hear a different answer from different places. But from what we saw in this last negotiation cycle is, unfortunately, a few counties, and it may be more than a few, utilize the threat of a host. And what I mean by that is that some counties came to the negotiation table and said, well, if you don't agree with our number, we'll let it expire and we'll just impose a host and we'll get all the money. And that is something that can be very damaging to the city, because the city in that negotiation posture is left with a discussion of, okay, do we agree with what the county did, or do we have to work off of what the county did? Otherwise, we'll lose it, because now we don't know if their threat of a host is serious or not. Now, a host has its own process for imposing it, and whether or not that county is serious about imposing it, that's something the county has to figure out. But the county has that threat. The cities don't have anything similar that they can fall back upon like a MOST. As we mentioned, the MOST is only available in 4 cities, and it's limited to that volume of water service.
Senator Halpern.
So a follow-up on that. So is it your thinking, regardless of what recommendations may come out of here, is it your thought, based on what you know of all of the cities, that having something like a MOST, or having something that is a leverage point against quote unquote the counties, would actually make the negotiations less contentious?
Our thought at GMA is we need to find a way to prevent the loss from going away, and we need to find a way to level that playing field so cities aren't being forced with their backs against the wall. So I don't know if that helps answer that question.
Thank you.
I think last comment from me, I think in the position of thinking of the voter, the average citizen, we all run on 2-year cycles, and most of our city and county elected officials run on 4-year cycles. And depending on your city's posture, they may be in the next election cycle. And if you vote to raise taxes, you know, you're pretty much going to be out of here. So that may create some undue political pressure on any given political body, depending on who may come first, whether that be the county commissioners who may be in the next cycle after the loss, or that may be your city council. And then I think it also goes to the form of government you have. If you have a strong mayor or a weak mayor, and you have a CEO style or a manager style. In Savannah, we like to be the great state of Chatham, but we have a great manager, city manager, and we have a great county manager. And I think with the political side of it, my concern is always back to the will of the voters. What protections do the voters have if the people they elected this time can't get it right? They don't have any fail-safe to go back and put it back on the ballot or anything like that. Should the people they voted for, and they may want to change their minds, right, and not vote for those same people again. We've seen it happen. What recommendations do you envision that would just give voters a protection? I'm maybe not so much protecting the county or the city, but protecting the citizen, the voter, the taxpayer.
Well, that's a really good question. And I don't know if I have a full answer for that right now. I mean, I really do think that the voters really just want to see their local governments getting along, and they want to see the process. They want to be able to understand it. I've seen too many situations in this last cycle where the discussions were held behind closed doors, and that doesn't help anyone. That doesn't help the citizens know what's going on. It doesn't help the negotiation posture, because if you don't know what the county or the city is doing as far as why they came to their reasoning, if they're not putting anything in writing, if they're having everything behind closed doors, it makes it really hard for citizens to know why there's fighting. Because all you see at that point is a vote here that says no, a vote here that says no, a vote here that says no. And that just doesn't work out for the citizens, because they're just worried about, am I going to have to pay more in taxes? Am I going to have my services? Yep.
So there is no requirement that you have to have a public hearing as it relates to loss negotiations or any of our additional taxes. There's no public negotiation that has to take place.
So public meetings do need to be, open meetings law does apply to meetings of a city or a county when they have something like this on an agenda. Unfortunately, we've seen some situations where local governments might ignore that and go into a closed session to discuss how they're going to do this. Now, there are exceptions in the Open Meetings Act for when you're working with a mediator and things like that, but the general discussions, the general work should be in public. But on top of that, and perhaps even more importantly, is at the end of the day, what ends up getting submitted to DOR are numbers, right? It's a split. And there's no requirement that those numbers have any sort of explanation behind them. And so those numbers could get submitted to DOR, and then in 10 years, the next person comes along and is trying to figure out, why did we have a 75-25 split? And no one knows, because no one was around anymore. And that makes it difficult for those citizens to know what's coming up next too.
Absolutely. We have questions from Senator Goodman. I saw your light first. I think you're 13. And Commissioner Davis, are you Mike 11? Okay, we'll go in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just thinking about, where I live at, and all of your businesses are in your cities. And so, most of your sales tax are collected in your cities. Does it not throw it way the other way for, in some of these rural counties that, have a city, if you make it where the city can run off and do their own thing, because most of the sales tax is going to be collected in the city? I'm just asking the question. You understand what I'm saying?
I follow what you're saying.
In other words, where I live at, I can't buy a pair of Levi's where I live or what. You know what I'm?
Sure.
So, I mean, I don't know what percentage it is, but I would love to know. You may know the answer to that. What percentage of these sales tax dollars are actually collected in the cities versus the counties?
I don't know that. You don't have that data, do you? Okay. So I don't think we have data on that because the point of sale or point of destination data isn't fully available. I think we have percentage of how many, like percentage of businesses that are located in the city in the state, and it's something like north of 40-something% are located within a city limit. But to your point of if you had a tax that was only collected in the city that was given only to the city, yes, that would preclude funding from that tax to an unincorporated area. But the idea here isn't that this tax would just be the only tax, right? The local option sales tax is a special district tax. It's negotiated between the county and the city. So it's supposed to be split depending on the qualified municipalities and a lot of the other factors, those 8 criteria and whatever else might be important to that community. So in theory, the county and the cities should be getting something through the local option sales tax. The whole point with the homestead option sales tax versus a most or anything like a most is that in the homestead option sales tax, it is actually not required to be shared with the cities. That was actually the problem with the first lost, is the one that got ruled unconstitutional in the 70s was it was a county tax that was being shared with the cities, and the Georgia Supreme Court said that's not constitutional. So what you end up having is in a host situation, you have the opposite of what you're talking about. You have a county and then the cities are left without it. In a most, you would have that situation that you just described. But the point is, when it comes to local option sales tax, is that one party has that as a hammer and the other party is sitting there saying, we don't have a backup. If we lose that tax, there's nothing for us to fall back on.
So that if you had a host, they would still collect taxes in the city because the city's in the county?
That's right.
I got you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Davis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Patel, the first thing you talked about was the tension between the city and the counties.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that happens in most of the situations?
Well, I wouldn't say it happens in most of the situations. I would say it happens in more than it should. So you see from this data that Claire was able to provide us, the drop dead date to begin the negotiations is July 1st, right? And that 60-day period takes you to the end of August. So it takes you to September 1st. Math, not my forte, sorry. But you see, throughout this process in this last cycle, you still had, by the end of October, you still had 54 counties, give or take, that were still in the process. And that's way more cities because there's more cities than there are counties. And so, yeah, there's a challenge here is that while it's not most of the local governments that are fighting, it's probably too many, right? It's probably too many.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds like they need a conference committee on the lost tax. Get a conference committee report on that. In all fairness, I want everybody to know this is a disclaimer. This seems a little GMA heavy. That's because I work with Dante Handel from ACCG, and then in our subsequent meetings, it will be all the way geared to the county's perspective, and they will present just so everyone has that disclaimer and disclosure that we will hear from the county in the same brevity that we heard from GMA at this time. Mr. Pell, if there are no other questions, we'll ask for you to have your city officials to come and provide testimony to the committee.
Sounds great. Mayor Smith is going to go first.
Everybody do we need a quick recess, 5 minutes, restroom break? We good? All right, let's go.
Good afternoon. Thank you all. Hey, cuz. Thank you all for giving us the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I want to put a little personal, I guess.
I ain't got to tell us who you are.
Okay. You didn't know?
I thought we were cousins too, so if you're related to Russ, you're related to me.
Well, I don't tell many people that, so don't tell anybody, please. But anyway, now my name is Julie Smith, and I have the honor and privilege of being the mayor of the city of Tifton, and I'm the former immediate past president of the Georgia Municipal Association, which is also a significant honor. But I want to share with you just my personal experience, which was very traumatizing. It was very difficult. We expect in Washington there to be contention. We expect argument. We expect that, and it's unfortunate that we expect that out of the federal government, but we've become so immune to it. It's just part of our day-to-day life. We don't like it when it happens on our state level. It does occasionally, but we don't like it. But when it happens on a local level, it's a whole different ball game. And it's very difficult to be a good local leader when you can't sit down across the table from your counterpart, whether it's from the county's perspective to the city or the city's perspective to the county. The people that are suffering because of that aren't us, although we do. Thank God for vodka is all I can say, because that's what got me through a lot of this. I'm teasing. No, but but the people that suffer are citizens. When we can't sit down and look out for their well-being, they suffer. And that's what we're here to talk about today. If we had really fair negotiation, I can't tell you how much the city of Tifton would have saved in consultant fees, in attorney and legal fees. Those fees would have been nominal for just day-to-day government. We went in hopes of fair negotiation using those 8 criteria. And I think it was Senator Goodman that mentioned about the certificate, how many certificates had not, they had all been renewed in essence. We renewed ours, but we didn't do it through negotiation. We settled. And you remember we talked about baseball arbitration was ruled unconstitutional, and there were those 50 or so cities that were caught up in that and just had to settle quickly so we could get that was my city. So for the past 20 years, I have not been able to have local option sales tax collected because we had good negotiation. In the city of Tifton, which is a thriving little South Georgia, sort of rural but very thriving community, we're stuck with what we got 20 years ago because of baseball arbitration being ruled unconstitutional. 10 years later, and I was not at the table at that time, I was on the council, but I wasn't part of the negotiation. That was the mayor at that time. So I'm not sure what those conversations were, but we received the exact same split that we got, same distribution, 10 years prior. Well, when we rolled around to this past year in 2022, we had our 8 criteria. We had all of our data. Our community had grown, both in population and certainly in businesses. I mean, there's building going all over my community, thank goodness. I have the benefit of having Interstate 75 and numerous highways that run through my community. Brings in a lot of people who pay these taxes for us, thankfully. I have a great college in Abraham Baldwin College. I have the University of Georgia School of Agriculture. I have a lot of things going on in my community. So it's a thriving little community. Population about 17,000, which is up from the last census. We went in with those 8 criteria prepared to negotiate. Right now, we receive about 30% of the local option sales tax. We expected 45, and we had the data to prove it. We sat down at the table, prepared to negotiate and talk, had all of our data, everything ready to go, and my county commission chair presented me with a letter and said, if you don't agree to do these things, 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're going to let lost lapse, and we're going to impose a host. Excuse me, I thought this was a negotiation process. We're negotiating. You can accept it or not. It's on you. That was our negotiation. We went into mediation. It's non-binding, remember? We wasted 2 days mediating. They were still going to impose a host. Thankfully, we got much of our business community and sat down, and it's hard enough for all of us to understand. We live and breathe government, whether it's local government, state government, whatever it is. We at least have a working knowledge and enough to be dangerous. Try to explain this to someone who's never been exposed to any of this, how this works. All they know is my city and my county are fighting, and I don't like it. It's an embarrassment. My economic development director called me in his office. We were flirting with recruiting a new industry, a very good new industry that would have been great for Tift County. And he said, if y'all don't get this together, we're going to lose this industry. I said, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? We're going to lose them anyway, because a host means the businesses pay a much higher property tax. Only that homestead person pays that lower property tax with a host. So it's going to kill our economic and industrial development if y'all impose a host. This is what I said to the county. It's also what I said to my economic development director. And he said, I don't care, fix it. What do you want me to do? We're operating within the laws of the state. We're trying to negotiate in good faith. It was horrible. All of you know Penny Houston. Love Penny too. Interestingly enough, at the same time that I was president of GMA, my counterpart, Melissa Hughes, who's a county commissioner in Tift County, was the president of ACCG. Melissa's a friend of mine. We went to high school together. She looks older than me, but that's another story. But anyway, don't tell her I said that, Commissioner. I'm teasing. But anyway, Penny came and sat with Melissa and myself and said, what am I going to do? I've got people calling me in Atlanta. Our mutual constituents calling me. What are we going to do? So Penny, I don't know. I can't tolerate a host. I just want my share of lost. So anyway, I say all that to say it becomes a media circus. The people that love bad news, the Facebooks and the Twitters and all those things, and it exhausts our citizens and our shared constituents. My general fund budget for the city of Tifton is a little over $16 million. In 2022, we collected just a little over $4 million in property tax. You know how much we collected in sales tax? Almost $4 million. It's a quarter of my general fund budget. Take that away, and something's going away. I don't know what it is. I hope I don't ever have to know what it is. I hope my citizens don't ever have to know what it is. But this has got to be fixed. Anytime one person has the heavy hammer, when two people are trying to sit down and negotiate, to say, you do this or it's going away, that's just not right. That's not negotiation. That's a scary tactic. So we didn't negotiate for what we ended up getting, that same 30% that we've gotten over all these years. We settled. We caved. I couldn't take it anymore. I said, if you'll just give us what we got, I'll sign this thing and we'll go away. And we'll make do with the best we can. I've got the data to prove those numbers should be different, but I'll throw that away. Just get that dadgum certificate in to these nice gentlemen so that my citizens don't suffer. And that's what we did. So please, do what you can to help us. Anything that I can share with you about our experience, I'll be happy to. The good news is, once everything got signed, once everything went into the state, we sat down with our county and we said, you know what? We're not doing this anymore. We're not arguing, because we're going to, by God, we're going to fix this. And my friends at GMA heard that request. My friends at the county heard that request. And we are not going to put our citizens and ourselves through this again. I had to apologize to some of my cohorts on the county commission because it got that ugly, and it got that ugly publicly. And here I was, president of GMA, and had signed a civility resolution saying I was going to be civil. That's why I had to go and apologize. But anyway, I know you're very busy. I just want to thank you for hearing my personal story. Tifton's a wonderful community. We're growing by leaps and bounds. I'm honored to be able to serve in any way that I can. I want to protect my citizens. Every one of us are in this together. And every one of us are 10 years away from going through what I went through a year ago. So with your infinite wisdom and the knowledge, you represent all of us. I represent 17,000 people. But they're important to me. It's where I grew up. It's where my children grew up, my grandchildren now. And I would lay down my life for those people because it's that important that they be taken care of. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I'm going to go with Mr. Melder, and then number 15, is that Senator Halpern?
Mayor, thank
Yes.
you. We'll be stopping to fill up gas in Tifton
Thank
on the
you.
way home to
Often.
Savannah. Just curious, and not sure if you're able to share this
Mm-hmm.
or not, but were those 4 conditions that your county counterparts asked you, did they have to do specifically with Lost, or were they bringing in other issues?
They
as
were
well?
bringing in service delivery,
Mhm.
and they were bringing in some other issues.
Mhm.
But they used Lost to, the only term that I know to say is kind of bring us to our knees, because that's what they had that ability. So, but it was some Lost, some service delivery, and then some other issues.
'Cause I think I've heard from other counterparts in other places
Mm-hmm.
where a certain body has leverage, they're bringing in other issues where they
Yeah.
might not have that same
Yeah.
leverage to be brought
Yeah,
to bear.
we did not feel that this was the place to leverage those issues.
Right.
That we just disagreed on. They felt they were, we felt they weren't.
Mhm.
And again, when you can't even sit down and agree on what the issues are, how are you going to negotiate through the issues?
Mhm.
So,
Thank you, Mayor.
you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Melder. Senator Halpern.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you, if I may, the
Sure.
same question that I just asked before, which is regardless of recommendations that this committee may put forward, is it your thought that Lost negotiations would be less contentious if you had something like a municipal option sales tax that would help you for property tax or
Right.
rollback or capital projects?
Sure, I do, as long as that most could be expanded. Again, in its current form,
Sure.
we don't qualify, but if it could be expanded to be something like a Lost, similar to a Lost, I think that would be very acceptable. The system doesn't work like it is. So whether it's a most, whether it's adjusting Lost so that maybe the criteria are different or the timing's different or those type of things, I'm open for anything. But I do think that is that is something definitely to be considered, as long as we could expand the municipal option sales tax to be a little more free for us to use other than the infrastructure the way it's set up.
Thank you, Senator Halpern. Mic number 13, Senator Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got a quick question for you, cuz.
Sure.
What's the population of Tifton? You said it's 17,000?
It's about 17,000.
And what's the total population of Tift County?
Tift County's almost 42,000.
42,000.
That's including the 17.
Almost half.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry? Yeah, that's the double count.
And
My
so
friend over here is being silly.
if I'm trying to run this through my mind, but if when you get an impasse like this and a county puts in a host, they can, the city's within the county, so they're going to be collecting the money. Only the county is going to be collecting all the money. If you went to a municipal tax, if you came in an impasse like this, I would imagine most of the collection, and I know someone said something earlier, but I would imagine most of the collection takes place in the city. I mean, if you go to the pub to get a pizza, or you go to the mall or whatever,
That's where all the hotels are. It's where all the, we've got a very strong, thriving downtown restaurants along the interstate right there.
So what happens at that point? I guess what I'm trying to say is how do you go about leveling the playing field that it is in the best interest of the citizens of, because a lot of people are paying taxes in the city and the county.
That's right.
I mean, you take, my brother, he's a farmer, but he lives in the city of Tifton.
As do I. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So,
I do. I absolutely do.
And so I don't know. I'm curious.
I don't think you would be able to do, but either, and I'm just kind of, this is, if I can explain this, if the city could have their tax, the county could have their tax. If we were talking whether it's a most and a Lost or two Lost or something like that, there may need to be some adjustment there, I would assume, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't explored that enough to really give you a fair answer on that. Personally, I think if we could just fix the Lost through these processes that we're talking about, I think Lost could work. It has worked, I think, for other communities. it's this threat of a host and doing away with Lost that's so scary. So
I just wonder if there was not a host, just takes there wasn't a host,
right,
and you went into this, and I obviously know a lot of the people that you deal
Sure.
with and everything, but if it goes into suspension, and directly nobody's getting any money.
That's right.
The money is accumulating, but nobody's getting any money.
Nobody's receiving it, right.
But at some point in time, I know that's kind of like, but basically what y'all are doing, having to do this every 10 years, is you're going into this, and it's almost like granddaddy dies, and the grandchildren are all having to negotiate who's going to get what out of the
Yeah.
will. And
nobody was
no
there
wonder
when
people are
Granddaddy
fighting.
talked to the parents.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. So I certainly understand.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Goodman. I think, Senator Dixon, I saw you flash.
Mayor answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Davis.
Same thing with me. I think you've answered it. Trying to figure out if you were queen, what would you do? If you could
Yeah.
pick up a pen and fix it, what would you say?
If I were queen for the day and could just fix it, there would be criteria that would be fair. There's in that 8 criteria, there's an awful lot of gray area and room for interpretation. I also think that tying it in somehow to service delivery, which is another negotiation process we have to take care of, would be beneficial, because they are very similar, but they're not the same. And then I think the transparency of, for example, the county saying, this is why we think the city of Tifton deserves 30%. These are our figures. These are our numbers. And stating that to the public. Then we come back and say, well, this is why we feel we're entitled to more. Not using this same criteria, but a better set of criteria. Maybe not even 8, maybe shortening the criteria. Because the criteria seem to be where we get hung up. It's the interpretation of what that means. They're too vague. So, if I were queen for the day, we'd have 5 or 6 really strong, definitive criteria that can be justified. We would tie it into service delivery somehow or another, because we're talking about so much of the same thing. And then we would be transparent in how we share what our negotiations are. When we were in mediation with our county, we wanted to invite the media in, because we wanted to be very transparent. Let me show you why we think this. And they wouldn't allow them. They said, no, we're not going to agree to that. And I wasn't surprised, but I thought, well, we'll try and see. But they wouldn't agree to that. So we were prepared to share all of the numbers, all of the details. But we didn't feel that the community got that same return. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm sitting here bashing my county. We've worked hard in this past year to renew relationships, because that's the right thing to do for our community. And sometimes it's difficult even yet, but we've made a commitment that that's what we're going to do, and that's what we're going to do.
Yeah,
So,
that's the part. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Chairman, thank you so much for letting
Thank
me
you so
come
much
speak.
for coming,
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
I'll swap with Marsha.
We'll kind of rotate over.
Good afternoon. I am Tim Young, City Manager for the City of Hapeville. And since Mayor Smith took most of my points, and may have taken some of Marsha's too, because the negotiations were pretty similar, let me take you basically back into June, July of our negotiations. I'm city manager. I'm a CPA by training. And so I feel this personally because these were my budgets that we're talking about. So we walk essentially we have 15 municipalities in Fulton County, and we are I think we're the largest county that actually has a lost. So you have 15 alphas, you have 15 winners who are used to winning. In any type of negotiations, they've won their elections. I mean, they are some of the best of the best. They're the representatives, and they are good representatives. Fulton County is a great county, and the cities are all great in my opinion. We walk essentially into the room first day. And the county, the split that we had for the 2012 to 2022 was 95% to the municipalities and 5% to the county. I'm not sure if you can read this, but this was the county offer. Essentially, 65% to the municipalities, 35% to the county. Essentially a 600% increase. And if you ask the question, did they give good justification for it? Well, if they gave great justification for it, then how did we get, I'm going to fast forward, how did they negotiate all the way down to a 9% share? Essentially what the county did, I'm just have to say, is they threatened that if we did not agree to something, that they would go with a host. So you're telling, again, 15 alphas that you have no leverage. Essentially, we could have negotiated it down into 60 days if it had been something reasonable, but you essentially have to tell all the mayors that they have to go back to their constituents and say, you're going to lose and there's nothing that we can do about it. That's essentially what happened. Lost for us, we're a small city, we're 6,500 people, is about $2.3 million, but it's about $13 million out of my budget. If I lost that, and essentially that's what I'm looking at as a city manager, if I lose that, that's half of my police force. That might be one of my fire stations, one of my 2 fire stations that I can't fund at all. I have a major hole in my budget. I might be able to go 1 year in the fund balance, maybe 2, but that would drain us. And the time it would take for us to get some type of referendum to happen, that would be about my entire fund balance that I have extra in reserve. That $2.3 million is about 5 mills, and that's about 5 more mills that we would have to add essentially to our taxpayers, unless something else, in order to make that happen. The whole thing was trying, essentially. It was traumatic trying, and I don't mind contention. Look, Fulton County, we're estimating for this 10-year period about $3.8 to $4 billion of money. Well, guess what? I expect contention over $4 billion. I do. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. But I don't expect essentially a zero-sum game. I don't expect a no-win scenario that we're not going to be able to come up with something. And there was no backstop for the cities. If we didn't have that threat of nothing, I believe that the first set of numbers would have been better and we would have had a real negotiation. I'm not sure if there's much more I really need to add on that. Most of the questions have been answered. Would a most, and we do have a most, and that we are, thank God that we're able to use for our water and sewer projects. Would something like a most help? Sure, if it were expanded. But if it's left just to water and sewer, no, I'd still have a hole. I'd still have a hole in my budgets. So that's essentially what I, really would have to say. I'm open for questions, and I'll try not to be too traumatized.
Recognize Commissioner Davis and then Senator Halpern.
Thank you. Same question I asked Ms. Smith. If you could fix it, if you were king, she was not queen this time, what would you do?
I'd take away the host, or I would leave. I'd essentially leave whatever was in place would continue. Would continue on, and I would probably say would continue on at a population split, and then negotiate or force some type of negotiation from there.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Halpern.
And I think you just started to touch on what I was going to ask, because what strikes me, and again, I'm Fulton County.
Sure.
What strikes me is what you just said. So your city's 6,500 people.
Yes.
Also in Fulton County is Atlanta, which is 500,000 people.
Yeah.
Completely different cities, and yet the lost is being negotiated as a percentage. But but the impact on one city versus another city is very different depending on the size of your city. Is that?
And the property, and basically, and oftentimes, not only the size of the city, but also the property values within the city. The property values in Atlanta are, strikingly higher than they have been at Hapeville, and so their property tax actually brings in probably a larger percentage than ours do.
Senator Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What percentage of the people that live in Fulton County actually live in the county and don't live in a city?
So the last numbers, I think, it's almost 98. Now that we have the city of South Fulton, I believe we're about 98% in municipalities and just over, less than 2% actually, and it might be less than.
Yeah,
Right, it might be less than 1,000. I mean,
yeah,
it's almost 100% municipalities.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Melder.
Mr. Manager, how has the impacts of a loss negotiation in Fulton County with the 15 municipalities in the county, has that hampered coordination with other aspects of shared governing?
Not really. Honestly, it hasn't really hampered negotiation, though there will always be little snips and jabs. I mean, the snips and jabs actually, started with the ARPA money, et cetera. I mean, again, Fulton County is talking large dollars. We're talking billions. There's always going to be some type of contention about how this dollar is spent. But for general coordination between the cities and counties, we're generally pretty good about that. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Well, thank you for coming out today, and thanks to everyone here. I took a full sheet of notes, and I think the committee has some thought processes about a little suspension and a couple other things to maybe give us some guardrails. And we got one more. Who we got? Oh, Marsha, how you doing? I thought y'all were joined.
I'll be quick because it sounds like
Go
you want
ahead.
to wrap it up. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Marsha Hampton, City Manager for the City of Douglasville. I've been in the City of Douglasville for over 20 years. This was my second loss negotiations and my last. It was interesting to say the least. I will say that we entered the negotiations really hopeful because our intentions were to actually keep things the same. There was a new mayor, a new chairman, so we thought that, hey, this is an opportunity for us to walk down the aisle together and sing success. We even started early. But we knew fairly quickly within the first meeting when we were told by the county's attorney they didn't want to hear anything about the 8 criteria. Don't bring any data. They don't want to hear any of that. And be prepared that if we wanted to continue with loss, that we had to also negotiate service delivery. Part of the service delivery issue was that the 10 years prior, we had a fire services agreement with Douglas County, and they weren't necessarily satisfied with the cost of fire. I think everyone knows where the cost of fire has gone. We do have an intergovernmental agreement with them. They provide it countywide, which is beneficial for both the county and the city residents. But however, they were asking for an astronomical cost for us to go from $1.8 million annually to $12 million annually. Also to go from 28% of our share of lost down to 19. So those were our first starters. So we knew we had a problem. In the end, through conversations, we tried mediation. We did not settle until, of course, the last minute, like everyone else. And very much like Mayor Smith, we acquiesced. We settled with from 28% to 25.3%. We will escalate up to 26%, and we had to negotiate that fire services agreement and animal control agreement. So rather than paying $9 million, the $10 million that they requested us to, we are settled with $4.5 million. So we will pay that, and that will be a 10-year agreement that will end at $6 million that we will pay for fire services. Now, that's probably a cheaper cost. We did the analysis much more affordable for the city residents, but there's such bad blood and bad tension between the city officials and the county officials due to what we perceive as mismanagement of county funds that I am being charged by my city officials to actually start our own fire services. We are being requested by the citizens of Douglasville Douglasville to do that, knowing that that will increase their taxes significantly, but they do not trust the county. I understand that my situation may be extreme in comparison to the others, but I do think that it is very poignant to mention that this is what happens when you dangle money in front of elected officials and governments who don't do the right thing over time. Because we did not have a backstop, we were pushed to the back. We are having to raise taxes next month. We originally thought when we did our budget, we're on a July to June fiscal year, that we were going to have to raise it $1.5 million. A mill equivalent for Douglasville is $2.3 million. But even with a 14% increase in the entire digest, we're still having to increase by 0.5 mil. The 3 times we've had to raise taxes in Douglasville have all been to loss negotiations and service delivery negotiations. There has to be something, because ultimately, not only the city residents suffer because they are city and county residents. If you read the headlines in the Douglas County Sentinel today, all governments, the only governments who are negotiating loss with Douglas County are ourselves and Villa Rica, the school system, the Douglas County, as well as the city of Douglasville, who are all raising taxes this year. If they receive that increase, why are they also having to raise taxes? It is really a detriment to our city residents. Most residents in the city, they're coming to our meetings saying that they're having a 40% increase in property taxes. It is a real situation for us in Douglasville. If I were queen for the day, which I'm not, but if I were queen for the day, I do think there has to be some punitive measures for local governments who do not play fairly. We were willing to walk in and not make any moves and not make any changes because we understood what would happen. There has to be some form of arbitration that allows for those who do the right thing to actually benefit. But for those who don't, there should be some punitive measure in that, so that mediation is just not a conversation. I mean, our mediations lasted all day. For us, we were negotiating our some type of counter offer back. We look out the window, the Douglas County Board of Commissioners are leaving in their cars. That's how we were treated. So I know I talked fast, but I know you were trying to wrap things up, but I didn't want to repeat what my colleagues did, but it is we're still playing triage, and we will over the next 10 years, unfortunately, because of what it's going to cost the taxpayers in the city of Douglasville.
I follow very fast. I talk fast too, so I was right there with you every step of the way. Senator Watson.
Well, I talk slow, so
okay. Well, I can slow it down.
So thank you for being here. Do you think if we had a most that allowed you to roll back taxes and use it for capital expenditures would reduce the tensions and lost negotiations?
I'll tell you, in my personal situation, if my elected officials were behind me, anything that we can do to not negotiate with our county counterpart, we would happily do. And again, and I understand this is Douglasville, Douglas County, this is not everywhere in the state, but there was an opportunity to control our own destiny. That would be so much more helpful. As a government, we're extremely conservative. We're not a government that goes out, raises taxes. I mean, we're very strategic in what we do. So having that type of funding source, we would be able to come in here and tell you where all of our capital planning would be for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think a lot of cities would be in the same position.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Goodman.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say one thing that would, if anyone in the room could get this, I would find it interesting to know, after the latest census and all these renegotiations, I would love to be able to see from a 30,000-foot level in the state of Georgia, with the increase in the digest, what the average is for the counties and what the average is for the municipalities. So you could see, if you got, counties, cities are having to raise taxes all over the state, and counties are lowering their digest and keeping their basic taxes the same. I'd just be curious to know, because I think that'd be a pretty good barometer for what's happening across the state. I don't know if y'all have access to that kind of information or not. But
I don't, but I'm pretty certain GMA has some staff that can do that research.
Well, thank you. That was awesome. I got to come visit the city of Douglasville.
Absolutely.
That's down south. I'm sure it's close by us in Savannah. We'll have to stop by and take a look. But thank you for your testimony today. Am I missing anything else, Ashley? Well, I appreciate you all for coming out today and sharing with us some of the options and what may exist. And I would just tell you that, believe it or not, if it weren't for a conference committee, the House and Senate don't always agree on the budget either. And so we sometimes insist on our position and send it back to the House. And we usually come out of that conference committee report with some type of dialogue. And it doesn't seem that you all have that tool in the toolbox where you have to go to a conference committee, because we have one job, and that's to pass a balanced budget. So we definitely get that stress and strain on local governments as well as from the county perspective. But our job is to represent the entire state of Georgia and, look at what we've done over a period of time. And so I will echo the sentiments of our Lieutenant Governor Jones has seen that this is an issue and has created this study committee to look at the issue and to make recommendations that we may see in the next legislative session or sessions thereafter. And so he recognizes that as an issue, his team in his office. And so we're going to work study this issue, come back and present our report, and hopefully we'll have some recommendations, and we'll work forward and move through that. If there are no other questions, we'll move for adjournment. So move. Second. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.